What if the conversation you have been waiting to finish did not disappear when the tension became quiet? What if the message you revised 10 times, the apology you almost sent, the boundary you softened, and the question you avoided are still shaping the relationship, even though no one is speaking about them? On 7/23/2026, Mercury stations direct after a period traditionally associated with review, crossed signals, reopened conversations, and communication friction. But the deepest meaning of this moment is not that everything suddenly becomes easy. It is that the fog begins to thin, and what becomes visible asks something of you. Clarity is not the same as completion. You may understand what happened and still need to address it. You may recognize what you meant and still need to acknowledge what the other person experienced. You may finally know what you want and still feel afraid to say it without hiding behind anger, distance, humor, or perfect language. This is the uncomfortable threshold between confusion and responsibility. When communication has been strained, people often imagine that relief will arrive as a feeling. They wait to feel completely certain, completely calm, completely justified, or completely safe before they speak. But relationships rarely repair themselves through certainty. They repair through honest participation. Mercury moving forward becomes a symbolic reminder that the next movement is not performance, it is follow-through. The question is not merely whether communication becomes easier. The question is whether you are willing to become clearer. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from carrying an unfinished conversation. It follows you into ordinary moments. You can be making breakfast, answering emails, driving home, or sitting beside the person you care about, and still feel the invisible weight of what has not been said. Nothing dramatic may be happening on the surface. There may be no argument, no raised voices, no final decision. Yet your body knows that something remains open. You reread old exchanges. You rehearse what you should have said. You imagine how the other person might respond. You tell yourself that now is not the right time. Then enough time passes that bringing it up begins to feel awkward, so you keep carrying it. The silence becomes a structure. You may even mistake the absence of conflict for peace. But peace and avoidance do not feel the same in the body. Peace softens you. Avoidance makes you monitor the room. Peace lets you be present. Avoidance makes you calculate every sentence. Peace creates room for connection. Avoidance creates a fragile agreement that everyone must pretend not to notice what changed. This is why communication strain can feel so heavy, even when very little is being said. The emotional labor does not stop when the conversation stops. It simply moves inward. You begin speaking to yourself on behalf of the other person. You assume their motives. You predict their rejection. You build an entire private courtroom where you are the witness, the defense, the prosecution, and the judge. Sometimes you decide that you were wrong before the other person has even responded. Sometimes you decide that they are incapable of understanding before you have clearly explained. Sometimes you hold back because you do not want to create pressure, while quietly becoming resentful that they have not recognized a need you concealed. None of this makes you dishonest or immature. It makes you human. Relationships activate our deepest needs for belonging, dignity, safety, recognition, and emotional consistency. When those needs feel threatened, communication stops being a simple exchange of words. It becomes a risk assessment. You are not only asking, "Can I say this?" You are asking, "Will I still be loved if I say this?" You are asking, "Will I be punished for being honest?" You are asking, "Will this person dismiss me, leave me, blame me, or make me regret revealing what matters?" That is why avoidance can look like calmness. That is why over-explaining can look like openness. That is why defensiveness can sound like logic. Beneath the visible behavior, the nervous system is often trying to protect the relationship and the self at the same time. But protection that never updates becomes distance. The words you do not say do not vanish. They become tone. They become hesitation. They become delayed replies, forced politeness, emotional withdrawal, irritation over small things, and the strange loneliness of being connected to someone who no longer feels reachable. This moment does not ask you to blame yourself for that distance. It asks you to recognize how it formed. The signal surrounding Chapter 723, 2026, is not a promise that every misunderstanding resolves or every relationship returns to harmony. It is a collective timing frame for noticing that movement after confusion requires more than relief. It requires a response. The first truth is that understanding your intention does not complete the repair. You may know that you did not mean to hurt someone. You may know that you were overwhelmed, distracted, frightened, or trying to protect yourself. Your intention matters because it reveals what was happening inside you. But the impact matters because it reveals what happened between you. Mature communication makes room for both. It does not force you to accept a false accusation. It does not require self-erasure. It does not ask you to confess to motives you did not have. It simply allows another person's experience to exist without immediately treating it as a verdict against your character. The second truth is that clarity often arrives after the moment when it would have been most convenient. You understand the argument 3 days later. You recognize your defensiveness after the person has withdrawn. You discover the real boundary only after you agree to something you resent. You find the honest sentence after sending the polished one. Late clarity can feel useless, but it is not useless. It becomes useful when it changes what you do next. You can return to a conversation without pretending you understood everything the first time. You can say that your perspective has changed. You can acknowledge that you responded from pressure. You can correct a promise that was made from fear. You can admit that the first explanation was incomplete. Returning is not weakness. Returning is evidence that awareness has become responsibility. The third truth is that some conversations are avoided because you already know they may alter the relationship. You may call it uncertainty, but beneath the uncertainty, there may be recognition. You know that naming the imbalance could require a boundary. You know that asking for clarity could expose an incompatibility. You know that telling the truth about your exhaustion could disrupt a role you have performed for years. In those moments, confusion can become a shelter. As long as nothing is clearly named, nothing has to clearly change. But what remains unnamed still extracts a cost. You pay through resentment. You pay through self-abandonment. You pay through the constant effort required to remain acceptable inside a dynamic that no longer feels honest. The collective astrology surrounding Mercury has long been associated with communication, messages, trade, negotiation, travel, interpretation, and the movement of information. In modern culture, Mercury retrograde is often reduced to jokes about broken devices, lost emails, delayed flights, and former partners returning. But its historical roots are far more substantial than internet superstition. The planet received its Roman name from Mercury, the messenger associated with movement between worlds, exchange, commerce, language, and mediation. The Greeks associated the same planetary figure with Hermes, a boundary crosser who carried messages, guided travelers, negotiated meanings, and moved between territories that others could not easily enter. Long before astrology became a language of individual personality, ancient ski observation helped societies track seasons, political timing, agriculture, navigation, and collective rhythms. Planetary movements were interpreted as symbolic reflections of conditions on the ground. They were not originally designed as casual entertainment or deterministic declarations about individual fate. Mercury's symbolism became connected to the vulnerable space between sending and receiving. A message can leave one person clearly and arrive in another person differently. A promise can be sincere and still be misunderstood. A contract can appear precise while hiding assumptions. A relationship can contain love and still suffer from poor translation. That is the frame that matters here. Astrology, when used responsibly, does not remove agency. It does not tell you that a planet caused your conflict or that a date will fix it. It gives language to recurring human experiences. It offers a symbolic clock that helps us notice when certain themes become culturally visible. When Mercury appears to reverse direction from Earth's perspective, it is not physically moving backward through space. Retrograde motion is an optical effect created by the relative positions and speeds of planets in orbit. Yet the symbolism of apparent reversal became a useful metaphor. What seemed to be moving forward now appears to require review. That metaphor has endured because human progress works the same way. We move forward, encounter information we missed, return to what was unfinished, revise our understanding, and then continue with greater precision. A relationship may appear to be progressing until an old trust wound resurfaces. A family may believe a conflict is settled until a holiday gathering reactivates the original tension. A couple may make a new commitment and then discover that their expectations were never fully discussed. A friendship may survive years of closeness and then strain under one season of uneven effort. The return of the issue does not automatically mean the relationship is failing. Sometimes the issue returns because the relationship has reached the depth where it can no longer survive on assumption. Consider the couple who keeps arguing about household responsibilities. On the surface, the argument is about dishes, schedules, errands, and who forgot what. They attempt practical fixes. They create lists. They divide tasks. They promise to communicate better. Yet the conflict returns because the deeper issue is not the task. One person feels alone inside the partnership. The other feels constantly evaluated and never appreciated. Until those meanings are spoken, Every forgotten task becomes evidence in a case neither person knows they are building. Forward movement begins when the argument stops being treated as a logistical inconvenience and becomes a conversation about emotional reality. Consider the adult child who avoids telling a parent that constant advice feels intrusive. The adult child answers politely, changes the subject, and limits contact. The parent interprets the distance as rejection and increases the frequency of calls, questions, and suggestions. Both people may believe they are protecting the relationship. One protects it through silence. The other protects it through increased involvement. But the protection creates the very distance they fear. Repair may begin with a sentence that is neither cruel nor vague. I know your advice comes from care, but I need more room to make decisions without feeling monitored. That sentence may not create instant harmony. It creates something more valuable, an honest place from which the relationship can respond. Consider the friendship where one person is always the initiator, emotional container, planner, and rescuer. They tell themselves that people love differently. They minimize their disappointment. They continue showing up because loyalty is part of their identity. Then one unanswered message becomes unbearable. The intensity of the reaction seems disproportionate until you recognize that the message is carrying years of accumulated imbalance. The latest silence did not create the pain. It exposed the pattern. A direct conversation may not preserve the friendship in its current form, but pretending nothing is wrong preserves only the appearance of closeness. Consider the workplace relationship between a manager and an employee. The manager believes they have communicated trust by giving the employee autonomy. The employee experiences the lack of feedback as neglect. The employee begins overworking to prove value. The manager sees the extra effort and assumes everything is going well. The misunderstanding compounds because each person interprets silence through a different lens. When the employee eventually burns out or resigns, the manager may feel blindsided. Yet the rupture developed through months of missing translation. This is why communication is not only about speaking more, it is about verifying meaning. The symbolism of Mercury stations direct supports that movement. The apparent reversal ends, but the work revealed during the review period remains. In traditional astrological language, people often speak of a shadow period after Mercury turns direct, a stretch in which the planet retraces degrees already crossed. Whether or not you use that technical language, the psychological image is useful. A system does not regain full speed at the exact moment its direction changes. A car that has been reversing must stop before accelerating forward. A conversation that has been confused needs stabilization before confidence. Trust that has been strained requires consistency before closeness feels natural again. Momentum returns, but not instantly. That is not failure. It is how repair works. The greatest mistake at this threshold is rushing to restore appearances. People want the familiar tone back. They want the easy messages, the shared jokes, the affectionate routines, the public image, or the sense that everything is normal. But normal is not always the same as healthy. If a relationship returns to comfort without addressing what disrupted it, the comfort becomes temporary anesthesia. Repair is slower because it asks for evidence. An apology becomes credible through changed behavior. A boundary becomes real through repetition. A promise becomes trustworthy through follow-through. Clarity becomes relational only when another person can experience it consistently, not merely hear it once. This is why the period after confusion can feel more demanding than the confusion itself. During confusion, you can say you do not know. After clarity, you must decide what knowing requires. It may require you to send the message you have postponed, not the 20-paragraph defense, not the carefully engineered sentence designed to control the response. A clear message that names what happened, what you understand now, and what you are prepared to do differently. It may require you to ask a question without secretly deciding the answer in advance. What did that moment feel like for you? What did you think I meant? What have you been afraid to tell me? What agreement do you believe we made? A question is only useful when there is room for an answer you did not expect. It may require you to separate repair from reconciliation. Repair means addressing what happened with honesty and responsibility. Reconciliation means rebuilding connection. The first may be possible even when the second is not. You can apologize without demanding renewed access. You can clarify without forcing agreement. You can close a conversation respectfully without pretending the relationship can return to its old form. This distinction protects both dignity and truth. It may require you to stop using urgency as proof of sincerity. You do not need to resolve every relationship on March 7/23, 2026. You do not need to contact everyone from your past. You do not need to reopen harmful dynamics or violate your own safety in the name of cosmic timing. The responsible use of a collective signal is observation, not compulsion. Notice which conversation continues to occupy emotional space. Notice where your words and behavior are misaligned. Notice whether you are asking someone else for honesty while protecting yourself through ambiguity. Then choose one clean act of follow-through. That may be correcting an assumption. It may be confirming a plan. It may be acknowledging a delay. It may be naming a boundary. It may be admitting that you cannot fulfill a promise. It may be asking for time without disappearing. Small clarity carries more relational power than grand declarations unsupported by behavior. You may also need to examine your relationship with being misunderstood. Some people become so afraid of misinterpretation that they over-explain every decision. They provide context no one requested. They repeat the same point in multiple ways. They keep speaking after the truth has already been expressed because they are trying to manage the other person's perception. But communication cannot guarantee control. You can be clear and still be misunderstood. You can be sincere and still disappoint someone. You can speak respectfully and still encounter defensiveness. Your responsibility is not to produce the exact response you desire. Your responsibility is to communicate without abandoning yourself or manipulating the listener. There is freedom in that distinction. It allows your words to become cleaner because they no longer carry the impossible assignment of controlling every outcome. For others, the work is different. They rely on silence because they believe mature people should not need reassurance, clarification, or direct requests. They expect others to notice shifts, infer needs, and interpret withdrawal accurately. Then they feel unseen when no one decodes them. Silence can be a meaningful boundary, but silence used as a test creates confusion. A person cannot respond responsibly to information they were never given. Clean communication replaces hidden testing with visible truth. I need reassurance. I am not ready to discuss this tonight, but I will return to it tomorrow. I felt dismissed when that happened. I want to continue this relationship, but not under the same agreement. I care about you, and my answer is still no. These sentences do not promise comfort. They create orientation. Orientation matters because relationships become unstable when people do not know where they stand. Uncertainty causes them to fill in gaps, and those gaps are rarely filled with neutral stories. The mind reaches for past experiences. It assumes abandonment, criticism, punishment, or betrayal based on what it has survived before. Clarity cannot heal every old wound, but it can stop creating new evidence for the wound. Imagine the emotional shift that becomes possible when you no longer spend days rehearsing what you cannot say. Your body does not need to brace every time the person's name appears on your phone. You do not need to study punctuation for hidden meaning. You do not need to perform indifference while privately craving resolution. You begin trusting yourself to address what is real. That trust changes your identity inside relationships. Before, you may have been the person who stayed silent to preserve closeness. Afterward, you become someone who understands that closeness without truth is not security. Before, you may have used intensity to force resolution. Afterward, you become someone who can tolerate the space between honest expression and another person's response. Before, you may have apologized simply to end discomfort. Afterward, you become someone who can acknowledge genuine impact without accepting responsibility for everything. Before, you may have waited for perfect language. Afterward, you understand that humble language can be enough. This does not make every conversation easy. It changes the relationship you have with difficulty. You stop treating discomfort as proof that something is wrong. You recognize that some discomfort is the sensation of an old pattern losing control. The calmer future state is not a life without misunderstanding. It is a life in which misunderstanding does not automatically become silence, panic, performance, or self-abandonment. There is more trust because your words and actions begin matching. There is more clarity because you ask rather than assume. There is more self-respect because you no longer trade truth for temporary harmony. There is more peace because unfinished conversations are not allowed to become permanent emotional architecture. As Mercury stations direct on 723-26, the collective symbolism does not declare that communication problems are over. It marks a threshold where review can become response. What has become clear enough for you to address with honesty, even if the conversation cannot guarantee the outcome you prefer? The relationship does not move forward when the tension disappears. It moves forward when truth is finally given somewhere honest to stand. If this gave language to something you have been feeling but could not explain, share it with someone who may need this recognition. Subscribe for more. Prophecy Pulse teachings on timing, cycles, and human patterns. This event gives language to the collective pattern. When you are ready to explore your own personal signal, follow the link in the description or visit www.auriscodex.com. This is the Prophecy Pulse.